The Plaza Hotel's Grand Ballroom, 500 of the world's most powerful investors, and a CEO about to discover that the woman he destroyed had become his worst nightmare. Alexander Harrison stood at the podium like a conquering emperor, his tech empire worth $12 billion glittering behind him. In the front row sat his mistress Scarlett Monroe, wearing the diamond ring meant for his wife's anniversary. He had systematically destroyed Victoria, thrown her out while pregnant, cut off her money, claimed she was mentally unstable. But then the ballroom doors opened. Victoria Harrison entered in white Chanel, 7 months pregnant, carrying a tablet that would detonate his entire world. As a 15% shareholder, her voice cut through the stunned silence, I have the legal right to address this assembly. Alexander's face went white. He had no idea his discarded wife now controlled over $1 billion in company stock, or that she had evidence of his crimes, or that the security cameras had recorded everything. What you're about to see was captured by Harrison Tech's own surveillance system. Like if you believe justice always finds a way, subscribe for more incredible stories of betrayal and triumph. This is how an empire fell at the hands of the woman they underestimated. Some betrayals destroy you. Others forge you into something far more dangerous than your enemies ever imagined. This is the story of how an empire fell and how it was reborn in the hands of the woman they tried to break. A story of love turned to vengeance, of trust transformed into fury, and of a pregnant wife who discovered that the most powerful weapon against betrayal isn't tears, it's truth. In the gleaming boardrooms where fortunes are made and destroyed, where loyalty is bought and sold like commodity shares, one woman was about to learn that sometimes the greatest empire isn't built on money or power, but on the unbreakable will of a mother protecting her child's future. The morning sun cast long shadows across the gleaming marble floors of the Harrison Tech Empire's Manhattan headquarters, its golden rays illuminating the 50-story glass monument to corporate success that pierced the New York skyline like a crystal spear. On the 48th floor of this technological cathedral, Victoria Harrison stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse apartment, one hand resting protectively on her 6-month pregnant belly, while the other traced patterns on the condensation left by her morning coffee. At 28, Victoria possessed the kind of timeless beauty that required no enhancement, intelligent emerald eyes that seemed to see straight through to the soul, auburn hair that caught light like spun copper, and a presence that commanded respect in any room she entered. But today, there was something different about her demeanor, a softness that pregnancy had brought, making her appear almost ethereal as she gazed out at the city sprawling endlessly below. Alexander Jr., she whispered to her unborn child, her voice carrying the tender melody of a mother's first conversation with her baby. Your daddy is building something incredible for you, an empire that will change the world. Her fingers moved in gentle circles across her belly, feeling the subtle movements of new life stirring within. The penthouse around her was a testament to success, a $50 million sanctuary suspended above the chaos of Manhattan, with Italian marble floors that reflected crystal chandeliers, original Monet paintings adorning silk-covered walls, and furniture that had been featured in Architectural Digest. Everything had been chosen with Victoria's expert eye. She had abandoned her promising career as an architect to support Alexander's meteoric rise in the tech world, channeling her creative genius into creating their perfect life together. Their love story had been the stuff of fairy tales 7 years ago. A young, brilliant architect had met an ambitious entrepreneur at a charity gala. Alexander Harrison, then just a promising startup founder, had been captivated by Victoria's intelligence and grace. She had believed in his vision when venture capitalists had turned him away, had worked 18-hour days beside him in their cramped garage office, had sacrificed her own architectural firm to help him build what would become an $8 billion tech empire. Now, Alexander stood as one of America's youngest billionaire CEOs, his face gracing the covers of Forbes and Time magazines. Harrison Tech had revolutionized cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and digital security. Their personal life seemed equally perfect: private jet travels to their vineyard in Tuscany, romantic dinners on their yacht anchored off the Hamptons, and quiet moments on this very rooftop garden where Alexander had proposed with a 10-carat diamond ring as the Manhattan skyline twinkled like stars below them. But Victoria's fairy tale was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. Mrs. Harrison, Maria, their longtime housekeeper, appeared with the quiet grace that came from years of service to the ultra-wealthy. Mr. Harrison left early for his board meeting. He said to remind you about the investor dinner tonight. Victoria nodded, her attention caught by a sudden realization. Today marked exactly 5 years since Alexander had proposed on this very rooftop. In all the excitement of pregnancy and business expansion, he seemed to have forgotten their anniversary. A romantic surprise lunch at his office would be perfect, just like the old days, when she would bring homemade sandwiches to their garage office, and they would steal kisses between coding sessions and investor calls. 2 hours later, Victoria emerged from the black Tesla Model S at the Harrison Tech Tower, carrying an elegant picnic basket from Dean and DeLuca, filled with Alexander's favorite delicacies, truffle pasta, aged prosciutto, and the French champagne they had shared on their honeymoon in Paris. Her emerald maternity dress hugged her curves perfectly, and despite being 6 months pregnant, she moved with the confidence of a woman who knew she was deeply loved. The Harrison Tech lobby was a cathedral of modern design, soaring 40-foot ceilings, walls of cascading water, and a reception desk carved from a single piece of Brazilian rosewood. Employees moved with purposeful energy, their faces lit by the glow of tablets and smartphones, all contributing to the digital revolution that Alexander had unleashed upon the world. Mrs. Harrison. The security guards straightened immediately, their faces lighting up with genuine warmth. Victoria was beloved by every employee. She remembered birthdays, asked about children, and had personally funded the company's childcare center and mental health programs. "Surprise visit for my husband," Victoria said with a conspiratorial wink, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Don't tell him I'm coming up." The private elevator to the 45th floor, Alexander's executive domain, rose smoothly through the tower's core. Victoria's reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman radiating happiness, completely unaware that she was ascending toward the most devastating moment of her life. The executive floor was a sanctuary of power and prestige, dark hardwood floors, leather-bound books, and walls lined with awards and patents that bore Alexander's name. His corner office commanded a view of the entire city, its glass walls offering panoramic vistas that made visitors feel as though they were floating above the world itself. But it was the adjacent boardroom, a glass-enclosed chamber where billion-dollar decisions were made, that drew Victoria's attention. The door was closed, which was unusual during lunch hours, and the smart glass had been switched to opaque mode for privacy. Victoria used her executive access card, a privilege Alexander had given her when she had officially become a company advisor. The electronic lock clicked open with a soft beep, and she stepped into the anteroom that connected to the main boardroom. What she saw through the interior glass wall destroyed her world in an instant. Alexander, her husband, the father of her unborn child, the man she had sacrificed everything for, was locked in passionate embrace with Scarlett Monroe, the company's 26-year-old marketing director. They were on the conference table itself, scattered financial documents and architectural plans serving as an obscene backdrop to their betrayal. Scarlett's red dress was bunched around her waist, Alexander's shirt discarded on the floor, their bodies moving with the desperate hunger of secret lovers. But it was Scarlett's eyes that delivered the cruelest blow. The stunning blonde noticed Victoria through the glass and didn't stop. Instead, she smiled a predatory, triumphant smile and whispered something in Alexander's ear while maintaining eye contact with Victoria. Her lips moved with deliberate cruelty. "Your husband chose me, not that pregnant cow." Victoria's elegant lunch basket slipped from nerveless fingers, its contents scattering across the marble floor like the remnants of her shattered dreams. The sound of breaking champagne bottle echoed through the anteroom, but the couple in the boardroom was too lost in their passion to notice. When Alexander finally saw Victoria, his reaction was not shame or regret. His blue eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at her with such love, turned cold as winter steel. He didn't even have the decency to appear embarrassed as he disentangled himself from Scarlett and began dressing with casual indifference. "Victoria," he said, his voice carrying the tone one might use to address an inconvenient employee. "You should have called first." "Alexander," Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of her heart breaking. How long?" Scarlett laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "8 months," she said, running her fingers through her perfectly styled hair. "Since the Shanghai conference. You know, when you were too tired to travel because of morning sickness." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. 8 months. Her entire pregnancy. Every business trip, every late night at the office, every moment when she had felt guilty for being too exhausted to accompany him, he had been with Scarlett. "Victoria, go home," Alexander said, straightening his tie with the same precision he used to negotiate billion-dollar deals. "This isn't the place for emotional scenes." "Emotional scenes?" Victoria's voice cracked. "Alexander, I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child. Are you?" Scarlett's voice was poison disguised as silk. "Because Alexander told me you've been having problems. Stress can cause complications in pregnancy." The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Victoria felt the baby kick inside her, as if responding to her distress, and she placed both hands protectively over her belly. "How dare you?" Victoria whispered, her voice gaining strength. "How dare both of you?" Alexander's expression hardened further. "Victoria, you need to understand something. I've built an empire. I need a partner who can match my ambitions, not someone who's become domestic." The word domestic fell from his lips like a curse. Victoria thought of all the sacrifices she had made, her architectural firm, her independence, her dreams all given freely for love. "Scarlett understands the business world," Alexander continued, his words precise as surgical instruments. "She's Harvard-educated, ambitious, sophisticated. She doesn't spend her days picking out baby furniture and complaining about pregnancy symptoms." Victoria's emerald eyes filled with tears, but beneath the hurt, something else was kindling a fire that would soon burn down Alexander's carefully constructed world. "Get out," Alexander said, turning back toward Scarlett. "I have important business to discuss." As Victoria stood there, trembling with shock and betrayal, she noticed something her emotional state had initially missed. The red light on the corner camera, the security system that recorded everything in the executive conference rooms for legal protection. Alexander, in his arrogance and lust, had forgotten about the very surveillance system he had insisted upon after the last corporate espionage incident. Every moment of their betrayal had been captured in high-definition clarity. Victoria straightened her shoulders, wiped her tears, and walked to the elevator with as much dignity as she could muster. But as the doors closed and she descended through the tower that had once represented her dreams, her mind was already beginning to work with the sharp precision that had once made her one of New York's most promising architects. The elevator's mirrored walls reflected a woman transformed. The soft, trusting wife was gone, replaced by someone harder, more determined. Victoria placed her hand on her belly and made a silent promise to her unborn child. "Mommy's going to make sure Daddy pays for what he's done," she whispered. "And when I'm finished, the whole world will know exactly what kind of man Alexander Harrison really is." That evening, Alexander returned to their penthouse late, his clothes carrying the faint scent of Scarlett's perfume, a sickeningly sweet fragrance that made Victoria's stomach turn. He acted as though nothing had happened, kissing her cheek with the same casual affection he might show a sister. "How was your day?" he asked, loosening his tie and heading toward their home office. "Enlightening," Victoria replied, watching him carefully. "I learned quite a lot about the people I thought I knew." If Alexander detected the edge in her voice, he gave no sign. He was already absorbed in his phone, probably texting Scarlett, making plans for their next rendezvous. "By the way," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her, "you forgot something important today." Did I? Alexander didn't even look up from his screen. Our anniversary, 5 years since you proposed? For a moment, Alexander's fingers paused on his phone. Then he shrugged. We'll celebrate later. I'm busy with the IPO preparation. Victoria nodded, filing away this final insult with all the others. In the morning, she would begin the process of destroying the man who had destroyed her heart. But tonight, she would play the dutiful wife one last time, gathering strength for the battle ahead. As Alexander disappeared into his office for another important call, undoubtedly the Scarlet Victoria stood once again at their penthouse windows, looking out at the glittering city below. Somewhere in those lights were security footage, digital records, and financial documents that would tell a very different story about Harrison Tech and its CEO. Victoria Harrison, the abandoned pregnant wife, was about to become Alexander's worst nightmare, but he wouldn't realize it until it was far too late to save himself. The next morning brought the first wave of Alexander's systematic destruction of their life together. Victoria woke to find her husband already dressed in his armor of expensive suits and cold determination, his wedding ring conspicuously absent from his finger. Victoria, we need to talk, Alexander announced, his tone carrying the clinical detachment of a surgeon about to amputate a limb. He stood by their floor-to-ceiling windows, backlit by the morning sun in a way that made him appear more shadow than man. Victoria sat up in their king-size bed, the same bed where they had once planned their future, where he had whispered sweet promises about growing old together, where they had celebrated when the pregnancy test showed positive. Now it felt like a foreign country she no longer recognized. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, Alexander continued, not bothering to face her. This situation has become complicated. Situation? Victoria's voice was dangerously quiet. Is that what you're calling our marriage now? Don't be dramatic. Alexander turned, his blue eyes cold as Arctic ice. You know what I mean. The baby, the stress, your emotional instability. It's affecting my ability to focus on critical business decisions. The words hit Victoria like a physical assault. My emotional instability, Alexander. I caught you having sex with another woman in your boardroom. Lower your voice, Alexander commanded, glancing toward the door as if Scarlett might be listening. The neighbors don't need to hear your hysteria, Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in the sound, only the bitter recognition of how completely she had misjudged the man she had married. Hysteria. I'm carrying your child. Alexander. Our child. Are you? The question hung in the air like poison gas. Because frankly, Victoria, your behavior lately has been concerning. The mood swings, the accusations, the paranoia. I think you need professional help. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face as she realized what Alexander was doing. He was laying the groundwork to question her mental stability, to paint her as an unstable wife whose pregnancy had made her delusional. It was a chess move worthy of the CEO who had built an empire, but it was also the move that would ultimately destroy him. I want you to move out, Alexander said, straightening his tie with mechanical precision. Temporarily, of course, until you get the help you need. Move out! Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. This is my home too. Actually, it's not. Alexander pulled out a folder of legal documents, his movements as choreographed as a Broadway performance. The penthouse is owned by the Harrison Family Trust. I've consulted with legal, and given your current mental state, I think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay while we work through this situation. Victoria stared at the man she had loved for 7 years, searching for any trace of the person who had once held her hand during thunderstorms, who had cried when she had her first miscarriage 2 years ago, who had promised to love her until the stars burned out. There was nothing left but cold calculation and ruthless ambition. You have until this evening to pack your things, Alexander continued. I've had your access to our joint accounts temporarily suspended for your own protection. Of course, you understand how erratic spending can be a sign of emotional distress? The trap was perfect and comprehensive. In a single morning, Alexander had systematically stripped away Victoria's home, her financial security, and her credibility. If she protested too loudly, it would only reinforce his narrative of her instability. If she submitted quietly, she would be admitting defeat. But Alexander had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated the woman he was destroying. "I understand," Victoria said quietly, her hands folded protectively over her belly. "I'll pack my things." Alexander nodded, satisfied with her compliance. "This is for the best. Victoria, when you're feeling better, we can discuss reconciliation." After Alexander left for his office and undoubtedly for another rendezvous with Scarlett, Victoria sat in the sudden silence of their penthouse, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. She was 6 months pregnant, essentially homeless, and financially cut off by the man who had sworn to love and protect her. Most women in her situation would have crumbled. Victoria Harrison began to plan. Her first call was to Marcus Chen, Harrison Tech's former IT director, who had been restructured out 6 months earlier. Marcus was a brilliant programmer who had helped build the company's revolutionary security architecture before Alexander had fired him for asking too many questions about certain financial irregularities. "Victoria." Marcus's voice carried surprise and concern when he answered her call. "Are you okay? You sound—" "I need to see you," Victoria said. "Can we meet somewhere private?" 2 hours later, Victoria sat across from Marcus in a small coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from Manhattan's prying eyes. Marcus was 35, Korean-American, with intelligent dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the intense demeanor of someone who lived more comfortably in the digital world than the physical one. "Alexander kicked me out," Victoria said without preamble. "Cut off my money, claimed I'm mentally unstable." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That bastard! I knew this day would come." "What do you mean?" Marcus glanced around the coffee shop, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "Victoria, there are things about your husband that you don't know. Things I discovered before he fired me. Tell me." "The security system in the executive conference rooms, it records everything. But there are also hidden backup servers that Alexander doesn't know about. I built them as insurance when I started suspecting he was using company resources for personal projects." Victoria's pulse quickened. "The boardroom where I found him with Scarlett. Every second is recorded in crystal clear 4K resolution with professional audio," Marcus confirmed. "But that's not all. Alexander has been transferring company funds to offshore accounts, ostensibly for international expansion. But the money never reaches any legitimate business operations." "How much money?" $50 million over the past 18 months, all of it flowing through shell companies that lead back to accounts controlled by Scarlett Monroe. Victoria felt the pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. She's not just his mistress. She's his partner in embezzling from the company. "Gets worse," Marcus continued. "I did some digging into Scarlett's background after Alexander promoted her so quickly. Her Harvard MBA completely fabricated. She actually graduated from a community college in Ohio with a 2-year marketing certificate." "Can you prove all of this?" Marcus smiled, the first genuine expression Victoria had seen from him. "Victoria, I'm a programmer. I don't just save data. I save data in places that would make NSA agents jealous. I have video evidence, financial records, email communications, and documented proof of Scarlett's credential fraud." "Why didn't you expose this before?" "Because I was fired before I could gather enough evidence to protect myself legally. Alexander would have buried me in lawsuits and destroyed my career permanently." Marcus paused, studying Victoria's face. "But now we both have reasons to want justice." Victoria felt something awakening inside her, not just anger or hurt, but a cold, calculating fury that reminded her why she had been such a successful architect. She could see the entire structure of Alexander's deception, and more importantly, she could see how to tear it down brick by brick. "I need a lawyer," Victoria said. "The best divorce attorney in New York." "I know someone," Marcus replied. "Sarah Williams. She's the one who handled the divorce when that pharmaceutical CEO got caught with his secretary. took him for $200 million and his company. That afternoon, Victoria found herself in the chrome and glass offices of Williams and Associates on Park Avenue. Sarah Williams was a striking woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair, razor-sharp cheekbones, and the predatory grace of someone who had built her fortune by dismantling the fortunes of unfaithful husbands. "Mrs. Harrison," Sarah said, gesturing toward a leather chair that probably cost more than most people's cars. "I've been following your husband's career with great interest. Harrison Tech is quite the success story." "Was," Victoria corrected. "By the time I'm finished, it will be quite the cautionary tale." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly, the first sign of genuine interest Victoria had seen from her. "Tell me everything." For the next 2 hours, Victoria laid out the entire story while Sarah took meticulous notes on a legal pad. When Victoria finished, Sarah was silent for a long moment, her sharp mind clearly working through the implications. "Mrs. Harrison," Sarah said finally, "you realize that what you're describing isn't just adultery and emotional cruelty. Your husband has committed securities fraud, embezzlement, and potentially criminal conspiracy. Can we prove it?" "With Marcus Chen's evidence and my investigation resources, absolutely." Sarah leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile spreading across her face. "But I have to ask, do you want a divorce settlement, or do you want justice?" Victoria thought of Alexander's cruel dismissal, of Scarlett's triumphant smile, of the baby growing inside her who would inherit either an empire or the ashes of one. "I want both," Victoria said. "I want him to lose everything, just like he made me lose everything." "Then we're going to get along beautifully," Sarah replied. That evening, Victoria checked into a modest hotel room in Midtown, a far cry from her penthouse palace, but a place where she could think clearly and plan her counterattack. As she unpacked her single suitcase of belongings, she received an unexpected phone call. "Victoria, dear, it's Robert. Robert Harrison, Alexander's 70-year-old father and the founder of the original Harrison family business empire, had always treated Victoria like the daughter he'd never had. But they hadn't spoken since her pregnancy announcement 3 months ago. Dad Robert," Victoria said, surprised by how much comfort his familiar voice brought her. "I didn't expect to hear from you." "I know what Alexander did," Robert said without preamble. "Throwing you out, cutting off your money, that ridiculous story about mental instability. He's become a monster, Victoria, and I'm ashamed that he's my son." Victoria felt tears threatening for the first time since her world had collapsed. "I don't know what to do. Dad Robert, I'm pregnant. I'm alone, and he's taken everything." "Not everything," Robert said, his voice carrying a strength that reminded Victoria why the Harrison family had built a business empire spanning 3 generations. "Victoria, dear, there's something Alexander doesn't know. When you married him, I gifted you 15% of Harrison Tech stock as a wedding present. It's been held in trust, but as of your 5th wedding anniversary, which was yesterday, those shares transferred to your personal ownership." Victoria sat down heavily on the hotel bed, the implications hitting her like a thunderbolt. 15%. With current valuations, approximately $1.2 billion, Robert confirmed. "But more importantly, it's enough to demand a seat on the board of directors and force accountability for Alexander's actions." "Does he know?" "Not yet, but he will when you walk into the annual shareholders meeting next week and exercise your voting rights." Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced since yesterday morning hope. But more than that, she felt power returning to her voice, strength flowing back into her spine. "Dad Robert, there's something else. I have evidence that Alexander has been embezzling company funds and that his girlfriend has fabricated her credentials. Then we're going to destroy him," Robert said with grim satisfaction. "Victoria, my dear, prepare yourself. You're about to become the most powerful woman in corporate America." As Victoria hung up the phone, she looked at herself in the hotel room mirror. The broken, abandoned wife was gone. In her place stood someone harder, more focused, more dangerous. She placed her hand on her belly and spoke to her unborn child. Baby Alexander, Mommy's about to show Daddy what happens when you betray a woman who helped you build an empire. And when I'm finished, this company will be yours by right, not by his grudging permission. Outside her hotel window, Manhattan glittered with millions of lights, each one representing dreams, ambitions, and the endless human struggle for power and justice. Tomorrow, Victoria would begin her counterattack. Alexander Harrison had no idea that his reign as king of his tech empire was about to end at the hands of the woman he had discarded like yesterday's newspaper. But first, she would let him enjoy a few more days of thinking he had won. The higher his arrogance climbed, the more devastating his fall would be. The day of Harrison Tech's annual shareholders meeting dawned crisp and clear. Manhattan's sky a brilliant blue canvas that seemed to promise either triumph or catastrophe. 500 of the world's most powerful investors, financial journalists, and corporate titans had gathered in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, their collective wealth representing nearly $1 trillion of global influence. Alexander Harrison stood at the podium like a conquering emperor, his custom-tailored Armani suit perfectly fitted to his 6-foot frame, his silver hair styled with meticulous precision, and his smile radiating the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Behind him, a massive screen displayed Harrison Tech's impressive financial metrics revenue growth of 400% over 5 years, market capitalization approaching $12 billion, and expansion into 15 international markets. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander's voice carried easily through the ballroom's acoustics, smooth as aged whiskey and just as intoxicating. Harrison Tech has achieved something unprecedented in the technology sector. We haven't just disrupted industries. We've created entirely new paradigms for how the world connects, communicates, and conducts business. The audience responded with polite applause, their faces reflecting the satisfied expressions of people watching their investments multiply exponentially. In the front row, Scarlett Monroe sat like a queen surveying her kingdom. Her red Valentino dress a splash of scarlet against the sea of corporate blacks and grays. The 10-carat diamond ring on her finger, originally intended for Victoria's anniversary, caught the ballroom's crystal chandelier light and threw rainbow patterns across the white tablecloth. Our success, Alexander continued, has been built on the foundation of exceptional talent and unwavering vision. I'd like to introduce you to someone who embodies both qualities, our brilliant director of marketing, Scarlett Monroe, who brings Harvard Business School excellence and innovative thinking to everything she touches. Scarlett rose gracefully, her smile radiant as camera flashes erupted throughout the ballroom. Financial journalists scribbled notes about Harrison Tech's rising star, completely unaware that they were documenting the prelude to one of corporate America's most spectacular implosions. Miss Monroe will be spearheading our expansion into the European markets, Alexander announced, bringing her considerable expertise to bear on some of our most ambitious projects. The applause was enthusiastic, investors clearly impressed by Scarlett's poise and beauty. Alexander gazed at her with obvious pride and desire, his wedding ring still conspicuously absent, despite being technically married to another woman. But as the applause began to fade, a disturbance at the back of the ballroom drew everyone's attention. The massive double doors opened with dramatic timing, and Victoria Harrison entered like an avenging angel, wrapped in white Chanel. 7 months pregnant now, Victoria moved with the majesty of approaching motherhood, her emerald eyes scanning the crowd with laser-like intensity. Her white suit was perfectly tailored to accommodate her pregnancy while maintaining an aura of power and authority that seemed to fill the entire ballroom. Her auburn hair was swept back in an elegant chignon that showcased the diamond earrings, her grandmother's heirlooms, that predated Alexander's wealth, and her presence commanded attention in a way that had nothing to do with scandal and everything to do with raw, undeniable strength. The ballroom fell into complete silence, 500 powerful people suddenly feeling like spectators at a gladiatorial contest they hadn't realized they'd paid to witness. "Please excuse the interruption," Victoria said, her voice carrying easily through the ballroom's acoustics without amplification. "But as a 15% shareholder in Harrison Tech, a stake that transferred to my personal ownership as of our 5th wedding anniversary 3 days ago. I have the legal right to address this assembly. Alexander's face went through a fascinating transformation: confusion, shock, dawning horror, and finally a cold fury that revealed the man behind his carefully constructed public persona. Victoria, this is neither the time nor the place for what? Alexander, Victoria interrupted, moving down the center aisle like a bride approaching an altar of justice. For transparency, for accountability, for the truth about what's really been happening in the executive suites of Harrison Tech. The assembled investors began murmuring among themselves, their financial instincts detecting blood in the water. Cell phones appeared as people began recording what was clearly going to be either a public relations disaster or the corporate story of the decade. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria continued, now standing just 20 feet from the podium where her husband stood frozen. 3 days ago, I discovered something interesting in Harrison Tech's executive conference room, something I think you all deserve to see. Victoria withdrew a tablet from her white Hermes bag, her movements deliberate and theatrical. Marcus Chen appeared from the shadows near the AV booth, his fingers flying over a control panel as the room's massive presentation screen flickered to life. What you're about to see, Victoria announced, was recorded by Harrison Tech's own security system on Tuesday afternoon at 1:47 p.m. The screen filled with crystal-clear 4K footage of Alexander and Scarlett in the conference room, their passionate encounter playing out in excruciating detail for 500 of the business world's most influential people. The audio was equally clear, capturing Scarlett's cruel words about Victoria being a pregnant cow and Alexander's callous dismissal of his wife's emotional pain. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Gasps, shouts of outrage, and the rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters filled the ballroom as investors realized they were witnessing the complete destruction of a CEO's reputation in real time. Several people rose from their seats, some heading for the exits, others moving closer to get better video footage of the catastrophe unfolding on stage. Alexander's face had gone completely white, but Scarlett's response was pure fury. She leaped to her feet, her carefully maintained composure shattering like fine crystal. "This is a violation of privacy," Scarlett screamed, her Harvard-educated facade cracking to reveal something much uglier underneath. "You can't show this, it's illegal." "Actually," Victoria replied with devastating calm, "recording equipment in corporate conference rooms requires consent from all parties only if there's an expectation of privacy. Since you were conducting this meeting in a company facility, using company time, there was no such expectation." The video continued playing, showing Alexander's complete lack of remorse when confronted by his pregnant wife, his cold dismissal of their marriage, and his casual cruelty in ordering her to leave. The assembled crowd watched in horrified fascination as one of America's most successful CEOs revealed himself to be a heartless sociopath. "But this is just the beginning," Victoria announced as the video finally ended. "Marcus, please show our investors where their money has really been going." The screen transitioned to financial documents, bank transfers, and email communications that painted a picture of systematic embezzlement spanning 18 months. $50 million in company funds had been transferred to offshore accounts controlled by shell companies that ultimately led back to Scarlett Monroe. These transfers, Victoria explained, were authorized by CEO Alexander Harrison and justified as international expansion costs. However, as you can see from the banking records, no money ever reached any legitimate business operations. The murmur of the crowd was growing louder, investors beginning to understand that they weren't just witnessing a marital scandal, they were seeing evidence of massive corporate fraud. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, "I think you should know about the credentials of the woman Alexander just praised for her Harvard Business School excellence." New documents appeared on screen: Scarlett's real educational history, her actual employment record, and documented evidence of the credential fraud that had gotten her hired at Harrison Tech. "Scarlett Monroe never attended Harvard," Victoria announced. "She has a 2-year marketing certificate from a community college in Ohio, and was fired from her previous job for attempting to steal client information? Scarlett lunged toward Victoria with a scream of rage, but hotel security was already moving, having been positioned strategically throughout the ballroom by Robert Harrison, who had orchestrated this moment with military precision. "You lying bitch!" Scarlett shrieked as security restrained her. "Alexander loves me. He chose me over you." "Did he?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying clearly over Scarlett's hysterics. "Marcus, please play the recording from yesterday evening." A new audio file began playing Alexander's voice, clearly identifiable, speaking to someone on the phone. "Scarlett, darling, you need to understand something. Once this IPO goes through and we've liquidated the international accounts, you're going to become a liability. Victoria was useful when I needed her architectural expertise and family connections. And you've been useful for moving money and providing other services. But I need a wife who brings political connections and social standing to the next phase of my career." Scarlett's face went through the same transformation Alexander's had: shock, betrayal, and finally understanding that she had been just as used and discarded as Victoria. The recording continued. "Senator Morrison's daughter Catherine has shown interest in me. A political marriage would open doors that even billions of dollars can't. You'll be compensated generously for your discretion. Of course." "No," Scarlett whispered, her struggles against security becoming weaker as the full scope of Alexander's manipulation became clear. "No, he loves me. He promised." "Alexander Harrison," Victoria said, turning to face her husband directly, "promises whatever serves his immediate needs. Isn't that right, darling?" Alexander had found his voice again, his legal training kicking in as he tried to salvage something from the wreckage of his empire. "This is clearly a coordinated attack by a mentally unstable woman whose pregnancy has affected her judgment. These documents could easily be fabricated. Could they?" Victoria smiled, and for the first time since this began, Alexander saw something in her expression that made his blood run cold. "Marcus, please show everyone the metadata analysis that proves every document's authenticity." Technical data flooded the screen: digital signatures, timestamp verification, blockchain authentication, and forensic analysis that would satisfy any court in the world. Marcus Chen had been thorough in ways that reflected both his genius and his desire for revenge. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, "the FBI has been provided with copies of all this evidence. They're currently executing search warrants at Harrison Tech facilities and freezing accounts connected to the embezzlement scheme." As if summoned by her words, federal agents began entering the ballroom, their presence causing an immediate exodus of investors who wanted no part of a criminal investigation. "Alexander Harrison," the lead FBI agent announced, approaching the podium with handcuffs ready, "you're under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." The handcuffs clicking onto Alexander's wrists provided a sound that would echo through financial news coverage for months to come. As federal agents led him away, Alexander's eyes found Victoria's one last time. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice hollow with defeat. "Everything we built together." "No," Victoria replied, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "You destroyed everything. I'm just making sure the world knows who you really are." As the ballroom erupted into chaos, investors fleeing, journalists shouting questions, and federal agents securing evidence, Robert Harrison approached the podium with the dignity of a man who had spent 70 years navigating corporate warfare. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert's voice cut through the noise with the authority of old money and older wisdom, "the Harrison family apologizes for the actions of my son. Effective immediately, the board of directors has voted no confidence in Alexander Harrison as CEO. As interim chairman, I'm appointing Victoria Harrison as acting CEO while we determine the full scope of the damage and begin rebuilding this company with the integrity it deserves." Victoria stepped forward, accepting the weight of leadership that had always been hers by right, but never by recognition. The scattered investors who remained looked at her with a mixture of surprise, respect, and cautious optimism. "I built this company once," Victoria said, her voice carrying a strength that reminded everyone why she had been Alexander's most valuable asset before becoming his greatest threat. I helped turn a garage startup into a global empire. Now I'm going to rebuild it into something better, a company that values integrity over profit, employees over exploitation, and truth over convenient lies. The applause that followed was different from the polite appreciation Alexander had received. It was the sound of people recognizing real leadership, authentic power, and the promise of justice finally served. As the ballroom slowly emptied and the immediate chaos subsided, Victoria remained at the podium, looking out at the remnants of the corporate world that had just witnessed the most spectacular fall from grace in recent memory. She thought about the woman who had walked into this ballroom an hour ago pregnant, betrayed, and seeking justice. Now she stood as the CEO of a billion-dollar company, with the power to reshape not just her own destiny, but the destiny of thousands of employees and millions of investors. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Williams. Divorce papers filed, criminal charges supporting our case. You'll get everything: company, assets, custody. Alexander will be lucky if he keeps his freedom. Victoria smiled and placed her hand on her belly, feeling her son moving restlessly inside her. Did you see that? Baby Alexander, Mommy just took back everything that belongs to us. Daddy made the mistake of thinking he could destroy a woman who helped him build an empire. Now he knows better. 6 months after the shareholder meeting that would be remembered as Black Tuesday in corporate circles, Victoria Harrison stood in the nursery of her new penthouse, a stunning 15,000 square foot space atop the renovated Harrison Tech Tower that she had personally redesigned to reflect both power and humanity. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, illuminating the nursery where Alexander Harrison Jr. slept peacefully in a custom-designed crib that looked like a miniature architectural masterpiece. At just 3 months old, little Alexander already showed signs of his mother's striking features: emerald eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with curious intelligence, and a calm demeanor that suggested he would inherit Victoria's strategic mind rather than his father's destructive impulsiveness. "Good morning, my little emperor," Victoria whispered, lifting her son from his crib with the practiced grace of a mother who had refused every offer of a full-time nanny. "Ready to see what Mommy built for you?" The transformation of Harrison Tech under Victoria's leadership had been nothing short of miraculous. In 6 months, she had not only restored investor confidence, but had driven the company's valuation to unprecedented heights. The stock price had increased 340% as Victoria implemented revolutionary changes that emphasized employee welfare, environmental responsibility, and ethical business practices. The company's new headquarters reflected this transformation. Gone were the cold, intimidating spaces designed to showcase power over people. Victoria had created an environment that looked more like a high-end university campus than a corporate fortress: open spaces filled with natural light, rooftop gardens where employees could decompress, state-of-the-art childcare facilities, and collaborative workspaces that fostered innovation rather than competition. Mrs. Harrison, Jessica, Victoria's executive assistant, appeared in the nursery doorway with a quiet efficiency that had made her indispensable. "The Forbes photographer is here for the cover shoot, and Marcus Chen is ready for the board meeting." Victoria nodded, adjusting her emerald silk blouse the same color as her eyes and checking her reflection in the nursery's mirror. At 29, motherhood and power had given her a kind of luminous confidence that no amount of money could buy. The cover of Forbes would feature her as CEO of the Year, but more importantly, as the woman who rebuilt corporate America's soul. "Let's go change the world," Victoria said to her son, who gurgled in response as if he understood the magnitude of the empire he would someday inherit. The Forbes photo shoot took place in Victoria's corner office, a space that had once been Alexander's domain, but now reflected Victoria's architectural sensibilities. Clean lines, natural materials, and artwork from emerging female artists created an environment that was both professional and deeply personal. The photographer captured Victoria at her desk with baby Alexander in her arms. the Manhattan skyline serving as a backdrop to illustrate the scope of her influence. "Mrs. Harrison," the Forbes journalist said, reviewing the questions for their interview, "our readers are fascinated by your transformation from betrayed wife to business icon. What drives you now?" Victoria considered the question while Alexander Jr. played with the diamond pendant at her throat, a new piece she had commissioned to replace her wedding ring, featuring her birthstone and her son's in an intricate design that symbolized their unbreakable bond. "Revenge might have started this journey," Victoria replied, "but purpose sustains it. My son will inherit a company that proves capitalism can have a conscience. Every decision I make is guided by the question, what kind of world do I want to leave for him?" The journalist scribbled notes rapidly. "And your ex-husband? How do you feel about his current situation?" Victoria's expression remained carefully neutral, though a slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. Alexander's trial had concluded 2 months earlier, with a conviction on all counts: securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. He was currently serving a 15-year sentence in federal prison, and the civil judgments against him had left him with nothing. The man who had once controlled billions of dollars was now working in the prison library for 30 cents an hour. "Alexander made his choices," Victoria said diplomatically. "I'm focused on building something better from the ashes of what he destroyed." After the interview, Victoria made her way to the executive conference room for the monthly board meeting, the same room where she had discovered Alexander's betrayal, now completely redesigned to remove every trace of that painful memory. The mahogany table had been replaced with sustainable bamboo. The formal portraits of dead businessmen had been swapped for inspiring photographs of diverse leaders, and the entire space radiated collaborative energy rather than intimidating authority. Marcus Chen, now Chief Technology Officer, was reviewing the quarterly reports with obvious satisfaction. Under Victoria's leadership, he had developed revolutionary new software that used artificial intelligence to detect and prevent corporate fraud technology that was already being licensed to companies worldwide and generating hundreds of millions in revenue. "Victoria," Marcus said as she entered with Alexander Jr., "the European expansion is exceeding all projections. The London office reported a 400% increase in client acquisitions this quarter." Robert Harrison, now officially chairman of the board, beamed with grandfatherly pride as he reached for his great-grandson. At 71, Robert had found new purpose in helping Victoria rebuild the family legacy while spending precious time with the baby who would carry the Harrison name into a new generation. "My dear," Robert said, settling Alexander Jr. on his lap while the baby gurgled happily, "your father would be so proud. You've taken everything this family built and made it better than we ever dreamed possible." Victoria felt a warm glow of satisfaction as she looked around the conference table at the team she had assembled. The board now included 60% women and people of color, bringing perspectives that had revolutionized how Harrison Tech approached everything from product development to international relations. "Before we begin," Victoria announced, "I have an announcement that will affect our long-term strategic planning." The room fell silent as Victoria stood, her hand resting lightly on a folder that had been sitting beside her place at the table. "I've been approached by the White House," Victoria said, her voice carrying the weight of history in the making. "They've offered me the position of Secretary of Commerce." The reaction was immediate and enthusiastic applause. "Congratulations," and excited questions about what this would mean for both Victoria's career and Harrison Tech's future. "I've decided to accept," Victoria continued, "but with conditions that protect both the company and my role as a mother. I'll maintain my position as chairman of the board while transitioning day-to-day operations to our outstanding executive team." Marcus Chen looked both honored and terrified by the responsibility that was about to fall on his shoulders. "Victoria, are you sure we're ready for this?" "Marcus," Victoria replied with the confidence that had carried her through betrayal, public humiliation, and the complete reconstruction of her life. "I taught you everything you need to know about running this company ethically and successfully. Besides, Alexander Jr. needs to see his mother changing the world, not just managing it. As if responding to his name, baby Alexander reached toward his mother with chubby fingers, his emerald eyes bright with infant curiosity. Victoria lifted him from his grandfather's arms, feeling the familiar surge of fierce protectiveness that had driven every decision she had made since that devastating day in the boardroom. "Which brings me to our final piece of business," Victoria said, settling her son against her shoulder. "I received an interesting letter yesterday." She opened the folder and withdrew a handwritten note on cheap prison stationery. "It's from Alexander. He wants to see his son." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees as everyone processed this information. Robert Harrison's face darkened with anger, while Marcus Chen's expression showed the protective instincts that had developed toward both Victoria and her child. "What did you tell him?" Robert asked, his voice carefully controlled. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Alexander Jr., who was falling asleep against her shoulder with the complete trust that only children possess. "I told him," Victoria said finally, "that his son doesn't need a father who only remembers he exists when he's sitting in a prison cell. Alexander Jr. will grow up knowing that his mother built an empire, changed an industry, and proved that strength doesn't come from destroying others, it comes from building something better." She looked around the conference table at the faces of the people who had become her chosen family. Marcus, who had risked everything to help her seek justice. Robert, who had defied his own son to support her. Jessica, who had worked impossible hours to help Victoria balance motherhood and leadership, and the board members who had bet their reputations on a pregnant woman's vision for corporate redemption. Alexander Jr. will inherit a company that employs 50,000 people in decent-paying jobs, that has donated $1 billion to education and environmental causes. And that proves every day that business can be a force for good in the world. His father gave him DNA, but this room full of people gave him a legacy worth having. As the meeting concluded and the board members began to file out, discussing the implications of Victoria's appointment to the cabinet, Robert Harrison lingered behind with his great-grandson. "Victoria," the old man said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I owe you an apology I can never fully make. I raised a son who became a monster, and he hurt you in ways that I failed to prevent." Victoria reached across the table to take Robert's weathered hand in hers. "Dad, Robert, you gave me the weapons I needed to fight back. Alexander's choices were his own, but your support made all the difference. What he did to you—" Robert shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. "What he did to me revealed who I really am," Victoria corrected. "I thought I was just an architect who fell in love with an ambitious man. It turns out I was a leader who needed the right circumstances to discover her power." As they prepared to leave the conference room, Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and smiled, a genuine, warm expression that transformed her entire face. "Dr. Michael Chen wants to know if we're still on for dinner tonight," Victoria announced, referring to Marcus's cousin, the pediatric surgeon who had delivered Alexander Jr., and who had been quietly courting Victoria for the past 2 months. Robert raised an eyebrow with grandfatherly interest. "And are you?" Victoria looked down at her son, who was sleeping peacefully despite the corporate machinations swirling around him. "I think it's time Alexander Jr. got to know the man who might become his stepfather." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Victoria's new relationship was with a man who saved children's lives for a living, the complete opposite of Alexander's destructive selfishness. Dr. Michael Chen was brilliant, compassionate, and completely uninterested in Victoria's wealth or power. He loved her for the strength she had shown in rebuilding her life and for the fierce devotion she showed to her son. "You deserve happiness, my dear," Robert said, standing and straightening his suit jacket. "You've earned the right to love someone who values what you've built rather than trying to tear it down." That evening, Victoria stood on the rooftop garden of her penthouse, Alexander Jr. in her arms as they watched the sunset paint Manhattan in shades of gold and crimson. The city sprawled endlessly below them, millions of lights beginning to twinkle as another day of dreams, ambitions, and human struggles came to an end. Dr. Michael Chen arrived precisely at 7, carrying a bouquet of white roses and a small gift bag that undoubtedly contained something thoughtful for Alexander Jr. Michael was tall, kind-faced, with gentle hands that had performed miracles in pediatric operating rooms, and eyes that looked at Victoria as if she were the most remarkable woman in the world. "How was the Forbes interview?" Michael asked, kissing Victoria's cheek with the restrained affection of a man who understood that trust had to be rebuilt carefully after betrayal. "They want to know how it feels to be the most powerful woman in corporate America," Victoria replied, settling into Michael's arms as they watched the city lights multiply like stars. "And what did you tell them?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this rooftop, this man, this life that she had built from the ashes of her marriage. "I told them that power isn't about controlling people," she said finally. "It's about creating opportunities for them to become their best selves. Alexander tried to control me, and it destroyed him. I'm trying to empower others, and it's building something that will last long after I'm gone." Alexander Jr. stirred in her arms, opening his emerald eyes to look up at the adults who were shaping his world with their choices, their values, and their determination to create something better than what they had inherited. "What do you think, little man?" Victoria whispered to her son, ready to change the world. As if in response, Alexander Jr. reached toward the glittering city below, his tiny fingers grasping at the lights that represented infinite possibilities, endless opportunities, and the bright future that his mother had secured through strength, intelligence, and an unshakable belief that justice, eventually, always finds a way to prevail. The woman who had been betrayed in a corporate boardroom had become the woman who would reshape corporate America from the highest levels of government. The pregnant wife who had been discarded like an inconvenience had become the mother who built an empire for her son's inheritance. And somewhere in a federal prison, Alexander Harrison Sr. sat in his cell, finally understanding that he had destroyed the most valuable thing he would ever possess, not his wealth, not his company, but the love of a woman who could have made him truly great if he had been wise enough to deserve her. Victoria Harrison's story was far from over, but this chapter, the chapter of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate triumph, had reached its perfect conclusion. She was no longer the woman who had been broken by a faithless husband. She was the woman who had proven that sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the foundations for the most extraordinary transformations. And as the Manhattan skyline sparkled beneath them, like a field of dreams made manifest, Victoria Harrison held her son close and smiled at the future she had built for them, both a future where integrity conquered corruption, where strength overcame betrayal, and where a mother's love proved more powerful than any empire built on lies. The end of one story had become the beginning of a legend,